So good evening and welcome everyone to Building Collective Education, Leadership in Education and Church Leadership. My name is Brendan Hunter. I'm a program director here at the Episcopal Church Foundation, joining you from our office in New York, and as well as our presenter, Nadine Paul, who will introduce herself in just a bit. So glad that you have taken time out of your busy schedules to be a part of this webinar. Just again, quick few technical notes. You are on mute, but please use the chat box to ask your questions. I'll be monitoring that during the entire webinar in case Nadine isn't able to get to your question right away. But we will have time for questions and comments. You can also raise your hand to take advantage of that too. Click on the link in the chat box for a copy of the slides. We'll also send that out to everyone who's registered. I also want to just note, though, that we do record all of our webinars, so do keep that in mind if you're asking anything that might be sensitive or confidential in nature. We're always happy to follow up with you outside of the webinar one-on-one if that's necessary. And also real quickly, want to just give a quick introduction to the Episcopal Church Foundation and our Fellowship Partners Program. ECF is a lay-led organization founded in 1949. We strengthen the leadership, strategic, and financial capabilities of Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and other organizations like camps and conference centers and other charitable organizations. And we do this through a variety of programs. We do capital campaigns, endowment management, strategic solutions, our Vital Teams program for strengthening lay clergy partnerships and teams. As well as our publications. You may have heard of the Vestry Resource Guide, ECF Vital Practices with Vestry Papers. I encourage you to subscribe for that for free on ecfep.org. And of course, our Fellowship Partners Program, of which Nadine is a member of our ECF Fellowship family. This program is actually our longest running program. It was founded in 1964. We have selected over 218 with the last group, 223 with fellows have been named since the inception of the fellowship. And these are emerging scholars and emerging scholars and ministry leaders who are doing tremendous work throughout the Episcopal Church. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Nadine. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brendan. Can you all hear me? I hope the audio is coming through clearly. Hopefully it's good. Brendan, can you hear me? Excellent. I am so grateful to have had the chance to prepare and share a topic for this webinar this evening. As Brendan has shared, my name is Nadine Paul, and it is just an honor to have been a member and to be a member of the Episcopal Church Foundation Fellowship family. As I'll mention as I go through this webinar, one of the things that I appreciate is that it has given me such beautiful and powerful exposure to the work of the global church. And so I hope that the topic that I present, even though it will touch specifically on the work that we're doing with our ministry in Haiti, I hope many of you across the US and even abroad, if there's others who join us internationally, will see different points of applicability and relevance to the work that you're doing and the hopes and the aspirations that we have for the global church. So in terms of our conversation, I'm an educator at heart and in practice, and so a lot of what I do is interactive. And so I hope that none of you will be shy to raise your hand virtually or jot down a question in the chat to really engage with this topic, because it's one that I am very, very upfront with in terms of saying that we are learning as we go. This is a topic that's near and dear to our hearts at Anseye Pou Ayiti, but it's something that I hope we can really engage in as a thoughtful and thought-provoking conversation. So just a little bit about the way that I wanted to structure the webinar. First is that I wanted to share a little bit about the foundations of this movement that is Anseye Pou Ayiti. It translates to Teach for Haiti in English, or just APA. And then from there, I'll share just a little bit about the what and the how of what we do. But the bulk of our conversation this evening, I hope, can really center around this point around redefining leadership. Why we believe that leadership has become a very toxic thing in certain circles and in certain contexts. But what we're trying to do is redefine it so that it can regain its power and its impact. And then lastly is, of course, linking collective with servant leadership and how, of course, it relates to the work of the global church. So let me start with this image, with this map. I am a proud daughter of Haiti, my homeland. I was born in Haiti. And because I was born in Haiti to two parents who truly instilled in me this love and this sense of hope and identity, I am so grateful that after being born in the country, myself and my two siblings and our parents, we moved to the United States. I was quite young at the time, but looking back, it was truly a privilege that I had parents who understood the power of identity and the power of home. And so even as we were growing up in the US, they still wanted to make sure their children did not forget where they came from. My mother is a registered nurse and my father is an Episcopal priest. And so I think throughout my upbringing, I've had this kind of twin pillar of faith and education. And I think both of those have had some real consequences for the way that this ministry, APA, was launched. To share a little bit more about why being a proud daughter of Haiti is so important to me, I wanted to highlight that Haiti is the only independent nation that was the result of a successful slave revolt. And so from 1791 through 1804, there was the Haitian Revolution for Independence. And it resulted in the first independent Black nation of the world. And at the same time, to this day, holds the honor, really, of being the only successful slave revolt that resulted in independence. And so that history runs through our veins. And I think it has also very much influenced a lot of the fabric and the culture that is Anseye Pou Ayiti. These images just share a little bit about how, as I mentioned before, my upbringing has influenced some of the work and some of the principles of collective leadership that run through our program. These are images that represent the fact that even after having immigrated to the United States, home and Haiti continue to hold a very important place in my heart and in my kind of professional trajectory. Some of these images represent me returning to Haiti often with my father, who, as I mentioned, was an Episcopal priest, recently retired, but a lot of the work that he did started in schools in Haiti. And so it's not by coincidence that I think I grew up loving school and trying to really connect that truth with the truth of visiting my peers, other young girls who wanted to go to school and have a great shot at an education, but didn't have the same chances in Haiti. And then the right side of the images represents me kind of going back and meeting with peers who wanted to take a leap of faith to really understand what it would look like to launch a change and to launch a movement that was centered on education reform. So when we talk about education reform, one of the things that I must highlight for you all is that as part of our earliest constitution in Haiti, in 1806, we said that education is a human right. And I think for anyone on the line, no matter what country you come from, I think you would agree with me that that's quite revolutionary, that in early 19th century, to state that education should be free and available to all is quite forward thinking. And so we proclaimed it, and we did it loudly, and we did it proudly. But unfortunately, when you fast forward to today, 2017, Haiti currently operates in a landscape of disparities. So maybe right now is the first time we can use the chat and really be interactive here. I'd love to see if anyone could chat in the box. Of 100 students in Haiti today, what do you think is the percentage of children who pass primary school successfully? Primary school in Haiti's context is basically the equivalent to 6th grade. So I'd love to see if there's anyone in the chat who could just do a quick guess at what you think is the average of students in terms of percentage that pass primary school in Haiti. Thank you for that guess, the 40. Yep, you are all very close. That's a really good guess, actually. Unfortunately, it is 30%. So of 100 students, about 30% are going to pass primary school successfully in the Haitian context. 10% will pass high school, and only 1% will get to university. So I think in any context, this is horrific. This is catastrophic. But I think it especially flies in the face of our people and our identity when we realize that in 1806, we said education should be free and available for all. And so I think the stark contrast and the stark inequity that exists in the system is something that deeply troubles me and deeply troubles all those who decided to come together to launch this ministry and this movement in Haiti. One of the things that I wanted to point out, the background image here is what we call the neg marron, or the maroon. It represents kind of the uprising that led to our independence. But the question in the forefront is something that really influenced myself and our co-founder as we were working for about 4 years to launch Anseye Pou Ayiti. So from about 2009 through 2013, We did a lot of work, a lot of what I now call listening tours, to understand one of many questions, but this one in particular. What has made us great? Right? If we sit and we understand the history of what has made education so catastrophic in Haiti, if we sit and understand the history of the revolution, if we sit and understand the history of socioeconomic difference, what has made us great? And I think one of the reasons why I wanted to highlight it here as part of our webinar this evening is that I think for many of us, we get involved with mission, we get involved with ministry, and only thing that we look at is the negative. The only thing we look at are things to be fixed and things to be solved. And one of the things that I appreciated about this approach, looking back, is that it allowed us to look at the assets. It allowed us to recognize that there's a lot that we can leverage, and there's an existing foundation on which we can build towards a greater vision and towards a common goal. And so that's what I wanted to highlight for you all as part of this last portion of the section, is that the foundations of our movement in Haiti are fivefold. The first is that it was 4 years in the making. Even though that wasn't always our first choice, I think a slow and steady approach to ministry allows you to be very intentional about the language you use, the goals you have, and the people you choose to work with. And so looking back, that was absolutely an asset to this work. The other piece is authenticity and respect. We are unapologetically Haitian in what we do, right? And that's specific to our context. Because what we realized is that we did not want this to be a cut and paste of anything that we may have read of or researched. We wanted this to be very local, very grassroots, and authentic to the reality and to the promise of our mighty nation. The respect piece is important as well. I don't know if you all agree with me. I'd love to hear your thoughts if maybe it's a little bit different than the work that you do. But when you are essentially dealing with breaking status quo and getting forward with equity and social justice, it is essentially a people-driven movement. Change is people. And so if you're truly looking and working for justice and equity, there has to be respect at the heart of that. And so I think that is the other foundation of this movement that has never changed and has never wavered from the first days of APA. And then, as I mentioned before, this idea of an asset-based lens. We don't come in thinking everything is broken. We also don't come in, the last point on this slide, is thinking that we are here to save anyone or be a savior to any community. We are here because we are in this together. And we realize that a lot of the past interventions have been about aid and charity. What we want to do is build something together, which goes back to what we're going to talk about this evening when it comes to collective leadership. Before I go on, feel free to continue chatting in the box. Brendan, feel free to let me know if anything comes up. I'm happy to answer questions as we go forward. I hate being the only one that's on the speaking end, and so feel free to throw in any questions about what I've shared thus far.
And again, just as a reminder to those who are participating on the webinar, if you click on the chat box in the upper left-hand side of your screen, that will provide you the ability to type in your questions and comments. Again, if you have them during other parts of the webinar, I will be monitoring the box to make sure that Nadine does see that eventually. But also feel free to raise your hand if you are just like, I cannot type this all out. I am happy to shift you to a panelist mode, which will allow you to speak your question to Nadine. So also feel free to take advantage of that. And really quickly, lastly, also to the folks who are watching on Facebook Live, you can type your questions or comments into the post on Facebook, and I will relay those over to Nadine. So do take advantage of that. It's great with all this technology.
Thank you, Brendan. Excellent. And so I've shared a bit about what we believe and the principles that created the foundations of this movement. The next step of what I wanted to share with you all is the what and how of APA, just to make sure I'm clear about what we actually do so that we can live out our truth and live out our purpose. Our theory of change. So again, like I said, about 4 years in the making, we realized that there's a niche we wanted to fill. There is a gap that we wanted to fill because for me personally, having grown up understanding the context that is Haiti and the context that is education, my entire career has been as an educator. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, but I wanted to work collectively and collaboratively with what already exists. And so what we realized is that our theory of change is threefold. This list could be tenfold, but we wanted to really hone in on one particular piece of the pie. And so one is that we wanted to have a culturally responsive approach. I think you're going to hear the word culture come up again and again in this webinar, because we realize that if we are truly respectful, if we truly believe that the context in which we operate has assets, let's one, know the context well, and let's be responsive to the culture that exists in that setting. And I think, just to make this relevant, hopefully for all of you, I don't think anyone would say that what happens in Baltimore, Maryland, or Annapolis, Maryland should also exist in Maine, right? Because all those contexts are so different. And the same thing in Haiti. We operate in rural Haiti only, and so we want to be very responsive to the realities of that context, instead of only looking to Port-au-Prince, the capital city, as kind of like the promised land, if you will. The second piece that we believe that will truly lead to education equity as the next revolution in Haiti is this idea of transformational leadership. And we'll talk about that quite a bit during the webinar. But what we believe is that leadership changes things, right? I honestly don't think you can point to an example in history in any context where leadership didn't either influence positive or negative change, right? And so what we want to do is be a force for good and equip a new generation of leaders who understand that the classroom can be a microcosm for change in a community and in the nation. And I think, as I've learned and worked a lot with the Episcopal Church in Haiti, we realize the churches can do the exact same thing. They can be a microcosm for change across society, but let's hope that it's change for good instead of reproducing things that we don't believe in. And then the last piece is data-driven standards. There is a terrible lack of data in Haiti. A ton of money gets invested in different things, but often with no data backing to understand, did it work? And if it did, let's replicate. If it didn't, let's try something new. And so for everything we do, we collect a lot of quantitative and qualitative data to make sure that what we're hoping for is where we're going. So what is it that we do? What is the what of Anseye Pou Ayiti? It is a 2-year fellowship. At the end of the day, we believe that we can recruit, select, and equip a new generation of Haitian teacher leaders who become the models of leadership for the entire nation. Because we believe that with education, everything can be unlocked. And so the first step of this is recruiting a group of young Haitian professionals from across the country every year. Usually it's about 50% existing teachers and 50% those who've studied other domains but want to get involved in education with our movement. The second is that they're placed in existing rural primary schools. Right? We understand that the foundation of this house that is education is quite broken. And so instead of jumping to university or jumping to high school levels, we want to start at the K through 6th grades. And we work with existing schools. We don't start our own schools. We work with schools that already exist and that have a lack of qualified trained teachers. One of the things that I get very excited about is that the Episcopal Diocese of Haiti is the largest in the world in terms of number of congregants, believe it or not. And so there's many, many Episcopal schools as well. And a good number of our partners are Episcopal schools. The third step is coaching. So over a 2-year fellowship window, as each of our recruited candidates are working full-time in the classroom, they're also receiving continued support, continued professional development, and individualized coaching. Because there's not a one-size-fits-all model to really changing the behaviors and the mindsets and the skill sets of a leader. But we've started to really build some very powerful programs that have started to lead to impact for student achievement, but also for the leadership of our teacher leaders. And then the last one is leading, right? After the 2-year commitment, we've actually been very upfront and said that this commitment is a lifelong commitment. We want our teacher leaders, after they've graduated from the 2-year fellowship, to become lifelong advocates for education equity in Haiti. We want them to choose to either work in ministry, work in as clergy members, or choose to become entrepreneurs for education, but always, always remembering what they were doing with us for 2 years and how they were equipped to lead for change for every child to receive their human right to a quality education. I wanted to pause and mention, I've used the word teacher leader again and again. Back to my point about being intentional. We said that word does not really exist in Haitian society. When you put the word teacher and you put the word leader together, people pause and say, what's that about? That's intentional because we believe, like I said before, that teachers are leaders and they can model leadership for any other leader around the country. And so that's why we call our recruited candidates teacher leaders. This is just a quick map of Haiti to show that we operate in the rural parts of the country. The blue star is Port-au-Prince, our capital city. But right now we currently have 5 partner communities that are between 2 to 4 hours north of Port-au-Prince. And in each of these communities, we have a handful of partner schools, many of them, like I said, Episcopal. And that's where we work with the existing communities to really lead depth of change and depth of transformation. But while you're looking at this map, we want to inject transformation in 5 communities, but the ultimate goal is to get to this, right? The ultimate goal is to have our alumni spread what they've used and spread what they've learned over our 2-year fellowship and really affect change across the entire nation. How do you do it? Transformational leadership and collective leadership. So that's why this topic is so near and dear to our work. We started in 2015 with 15 partner schools and 30 teacher leaders, and we reached 700 students that school year. And we're well on our goal, our 5-year goal, to work with 75 partner schools and equip 250 teacher leaders to transform the trajectory of 16,000 students' lives in Haiti. And as a quick progress report, we're so thrilled that this past school year, we started to see and have started to get some amazing momentum when it comes to student achievement. When compared with the 30% that I brought to you before as a typical passing rate in primary schools, we're seeing over half of our classrooms have over 90% passing on time, and a third of our classrooms 100% passing rate. And so this is all due. It's such a blessing, and it's so due to the expertise and the capacity building and the incredible commitment of our teacher leaders. They are in the trenches and making this happen every single day. I'll pause here because I think the next section is all about the leadership and really hopefully getting your inputs and your, but let me just take a quick peek. I don't think there's any questions so far. Brendan, you'll let me know.
Nope, nothing at this point, but again, please feel free to type in your questions, or if you'd like to speak with Nadine with your comment or question, just raise your hand. You can find that button on the upper left-hand side of your screen. And again, I know we have some folks tuning in via Facebook Live. I don't know who you are, but I can see that there are people watching, and that you can put your comments or questions directly into the post on there, and I will relay that over to Nadine.
Excellent. Thank you, Brendan. Such a natural. So then the other piece about leadership, as I said, the third part of this webinar was around what leadership means to us and how we think it's relevant for the work of the global church and the Episcopal Church more broadly. I come back to this question, and I think it's an important one because I think we are so tuned in, and so tied into what brings change that sometimes we are forgetting what has come before. At APA, we are so committed to understanding where we've come from, to understand where we can go. And so I would even say that this applies to the global Episcopal Church, right? And understanding what are the roots of our movement, what are the roots of the global church, so that ministry can continue to evolve in a progressive manner. And over time, over the last 6 to 7 years at Anseye Pou Ayiti, 2 things have come to the fore and have come to the forefront when it comes to what is truly building a new narrative of our mighty nation of Haiti. 2 things. One are what we now call the 3 C's of culture, customs, and community, right? It's the fact that again and again, we've noticed that impact, student achievement, community transformation is often rooted in having a strong sense of identity. Who are we, and are we proud of that? And so that's where the 3 C's have come through. And then the second piece, of course, is redefining leadership. Let me give you a couple of quick examples about the 3 C's. This is an intense and powerful game of dominoes. This is what's happening here in this image. What we believe at Anseye Pou Ayiti is that when children know their culture, when they understand their culture, and they're proud of it, you can use that as an asset to really accelerate achievement and accelerate what happens in the classroom. Because again, I'll repeat this again and again, the classroom is a microcosm of society. And so what we've done is we've studied and we've come to understand more deeply our culture, and we integrate that in what we do in the classroom. And so why not integrate a game of dominoes and the structures of it to teach math? Another example is that in Haitian society, we are very We love to move and dance and sing and have a lot of kind of active learning. And unfortunately, that has become totally reversed in classrooms. What we do in Haiti now is sit and memorize. Don't speak, don't move, don't ask questions. And what we're doing at APA is going back to our cultural roots. We want kids to be able to get up and be part of the learning. And that's what you see here when it comes to a lesson in mathematics and multiplication. I love this image. It captures a moment of inquiry. Again, at APA, so often we have kids in Haiti who are not allowed to ask questions. But at Anseye Pou Ayiti, we're flipping that script. We're shifting that paradigm because we understand that to create and to equip a citizen, you need to have problem-solving skills. You need to have critical thinking skills, and you need to be able to question and wonder. And so that's what we do in every one of our classrooms. The other thing, too, is just joy and a sense of life and song. We have a little bit of a bet going on at APA that we're going to release an album soon because we have had a lot of our teacher leaders and students create songs, and we sing them because they're songs that really bring to life the reality of education equity and liberation and freedom, and also just the joy of what learning can be. Another quick note that I love and that I get reminded of every time I see this image is joy, right? And a sense of safety when you're in the classroom. I love that a lot of our teacher leaders have been at the forefront of eliminating corporal punishment in our schools because they realize that if children feel safe and happy in schools, you cannot have corporal punishment. And so our teacher leaders and their influence has been able to start to eliminate corporal punishment in so many schools in our communities. Again, by leadership and influence, not by policy, not by forced change, but because of their influence and leading by example. The other thing that we believe when it comes to culture and community is that you need to make learning relevant. And so what we've done is integrate community with what happens in the classroom. We're trying to break down the wall that exists between the classroom and the community. And so when you're teaching about science and environmental protection, why not go by the side of the lake to understand what it really means to protect your environment? Because the lake is just a few steps from your classroom. Let's make the learning real. If you're learning about plant botany, right, and the structures of a plant, let's actually use the plants that are in the children's backyard instead of reading in a textbook about a plant that exists, you know, in a foreign land that doesn't really apply to what would be important to them. And now let's talk about this kind of point about redefining leadership as rooted in collective action. I'll make one statement here that is really important for us at APA. When you study the history of Haiti, at least, and I think it might be relevant to a lot of countries, including the United States, true, deeply rooted and sustainable change happens when many people are getting involved, right? I think one person can make a grand statement, can make a grand policy, but in terms of deeply rooted change that stands the test of time, it needs to have some kind of backing and some kind of collective action behind it. And so that's what we want to do with our students. What I love is that you can start to see the roots of this as young as kindergarten. These three beautiful girls are in kindergarten, and what we're learning and what we're teaching is that leadership is not leaving somebody behind, right? Leadership is understanding that I might be at the front of the line, but is everyone with me, right? Leadership is not it's not me, but it's us, and it's we. Those are some of the things that we're truly trying to inculcate and integrate into the way that we teach leadership and model it by example. These are some of our amazing teacher leaders at APA. And what I love about this image is that you'll see this in any workshop that we lead and any of the ones that we implement over the course of the school year. When they come together, they're building strategies together so that if one person in the group does not have a strategy for a really difficult 5th grade issue, there is almost guaranteed to be another person in the group who can come with the strategy. Or if no one in the group has a strategy, I can guarantee you will come up with something that's much more effective when you work at it together, right? This sounds simple, but to shift the culture of our society in which leadership has become about one person and one person in the front, this is really culture change, but it has had tremendous results. The other idea too is if somebody comes with a new innovation when it comes to, for instance, information technology and IT in the classroom, one person like Mayday, who's in the middle here, can have it. He shares it with others, and all of a sudden you have this catalytic effect across classrooms and across communities. And what's beautiful is they then reproduce this in the classroom. So what you're seeing here is a small group work happening in second grade. It may look simple, but this is revolutionary in Haiti's context because kids are not taught to share in the classroom. They're not taught to collaborate. And what we're trying to do is change the culture of that so that they can understand that this is leadership in action. This is leadership because you're learning to share and collaborate and ask questions and listen when somebody has an opinion and try to dissect truth when you're having a discussion. All of this is the skill, and all of these are the mindsets that we're developing even among our kindergarten all the way through sixth graders. Again, another example of group work in action. And what I love is that there's always going to be skeptics. There's always going to be questions when we first begin this model. What I love is that the student achievement results don't lie. And they're showing such dramatic improvements. And it directly relates to what kids are learning is important in the classroom. And the other thing that I love about this image in particular is that it can be as simple as a student running up to help his peer who's having trouble putting up a ruler on the board. Right? I think so often we put in our heads that collective leadership and teaching kids and adults even to understand it has to be super theoretical and super complicated. These are the kinds of gestures and these are the kinds of actions that lead to somebody shifting their mindset about leadership. And lastly, I think the other thing I wanted to mention is that when we model the behavior, it's long lasting. So Moiso, he's the teacher leader in the picture here who taught third grade. His students are now in sixth grade and are continuing to lead because of what they learned 2-3 years ago, right? Again, these are the kinds of things that have really deep roots in how you want to shift culture and shift community. This last image is the fact that our teacher leaders understand that when we say teacher leader, your influence should surpass the 4 walls of your classroom. And so each of them are responsible for a community development project. And so Toussaint, who is the gentleman here in pink in the front, he said he wanted to have a weekly radio program that would bring together parents and students and teachers in the community to talk about what is leadership and how can it really change education in Haiti. And so what I love, again, a perfect example of collective leadership. He could have done it himself. He could have said, I want to have the claim and the fame and the headlines. Instead, he called Jumi and Moiso, 2 of his colleagues there, to put their hands together, to work collaboratively. And because of it, the radio program becomes so much more effective and so much more successful than if Toussaint had just wanted to do it for himself. Just a couple of images of how this movement is building. These are members of our family who've, again, come together and said, I raise my hand, I'm all in, let's make education the next real cultural revolution in Haiti. So I wanted to kind of transition to the last and I think the meaty part, I guess, of our conversation when it comes to how this relates to the work of the Episcopal Church globally. I have felt so privileged to be part of this journey and this movement because it's helped me realize that the work that we're doing with students and in classrooms absolutely relates to the work of the church and absolutely relates to the work of really changing social fabrics. And so I was especially struck by an article that I read just a few months ago called Becoming a Leader of No Reputation. It is the link that's here. I'm not sure if, I think Brendan has already shared the slides, and so feel free to click that link or just look up the title by Scott Roden. He wrote it in 2002 and it's readily available online. As you're reading this article, it's basically a testimony. It's Scott Roden understanding that he used to be a member of the clergy and has learned quite a bit about servant leadership and the true definition of leadership. I know that it's a little bit difficult for everyone to be on audio here, so I'll just read the passage and hopefully you can follow along. The first is 5 years ago. If you had asked me for a scripture that epitomized the leadership ideal, I would likely have pointed you to Nathan's directive to King David. Whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it, for the Lord is with you. And then he goes on and says, now 5 years later, I would point to a different verse. In speaking of Jesus' incarnation, Paul tells us he made himself a man of no reputation, taking on the very nature of a servant. The verse does not say that Jesus became a man of bad reputation or questionable reputation, but simply of no reputation. That is, reputation, image, prestige, prominence, power, and other trappings of leadership were not only devalued, they were purposefully dismissed. Jesus became such a man. not by default or accident, but by intention and design. And it was only in this form that he could serve, love, give, teach, and yes, lead. I'll pause here. I'd love for everyone to just kind of jump on the chat or maybe even raise your hand to share what about this passage strikes you. I'd love to hear some reactions, given that I know many people on the line now have different roles in their church and in their congregations. I sat with this article for quite some time, and I started to really pull out gems over time. And so I'd love to hear what's really pulling at your attention.
So again, we'll give a little pause for those who want to type. If you would like to share that with us, I can move you up to a panelist function so you can share those remarks, your remarks with us. Just raise your hand or just note it in the chat box.
I won't put anyone on the spot like I tend to do in the classroom. So the virtual the virtual shielding helps in this case. Oh, here's one. Thank you, Charles. How do you develop your teacher leaders? Do you find them with this attitude or do you educate them? It's such a great question, Charles. Thank you. It is a process, actually. No, we find them with curiosity, with humility. We actually do quite a bit of recruitment and interviewing to really do a selection process. And so, for instance, this year we had about 700 candidates and we chose 45. So it's quite selective. And so we are looking for certain mindsets and dispositions. But when it comes to changing the definition of leadership and helping them understand the power of collaboration and helping them understand this idea of us, not I, that all is part of our training process and part of our professional development. And so we've done a lot of work to develop with intention what it looks like to have somebody understand the power of collective leadership. But I would say the baseline is somebody who's curious to learn, who's humble and understanding that they don't know everything. And I would also say the other baseline for us at least is somebody who understands that Haiti can be mighty again. If you come in with this kind of defeatist, everything is broken, nothing will ever be fixed, it's a little bit difficult to build from that. But I do think some of the mindsets are baseline and everything else gets added from training. So a lot of education of the educators, including staff. I mean, I've been on our learning journey. The way I'm speaking today is not the way I would have spoken in 2009, to be quite honest. And then back to that point, Charles, and to my answer, this passage, I think one of the things that, yes, thank you, made himself a man of the people. I like that in terms of your interpretation, made himself a man of the people. And I love that you mentioned made himself. I love that in the passage here it says he became such a man. It wasn't by default. It wasn't ad hoc. It wasn't something that didn't happen with intention. And I think the other thing too that I wanted to mention from this passage is I was struck by the fact that when I first read it, I thought they were saying made himself a man of no bad reputation, right? Because usually when you say reputation, it has a bad or negative connotation to it, right? Ooh, you have a reputation. It doesn't usually mean something positive. And so when I first read this, that was my immediate assumption. And so I love that the writer, Scott Roden, immediately came in and clarified that it was about having no reputation, not having the typical trappings of what is equated to leadership. And I'm hoping everyone can see that this is not unique to the Haitian context. I think around the world, we have started to backslide, if you will, into a pretty toxic definition of leadership. And I think even in my experience growing up in the Episcopal Church, it's alarming sometimes to see that even in the church, we struggle with understanding how to model our behaviors and our leadership behind the example of Jesus. And then the other passage from this article that I wanted to just highlight for you all is that Robert Greenleaf reminds us that the difference between a true servant leader who is servant first and the leader servant who seeks leadership first lies in the growth of the people who serve under them. The test question is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? I could not imagine a passage that could tie more perfectly into the work that we want to do for education and also into church leadership. I just think this should be a guiding light and a guiding test question, as Robert Greenleaf says, for what we truly do when we talk about leadership in the church. And so this has been really powerful for us at APA because we want servant leaders. We want people who understand that it's not about always being in the front, and it's not always about having acclaim and prestige and titles, but we want people who understand that it's about the collective and it's about collective mission. I want to give you an example of what this looks like very specifically. And also, I noticed Sheila has asked a question here. Thank you so much, Sheila, for that point about this idea of collaborating in ministry. I love what you said about this idea of giving to others rather than always using a model of giving to others in need. How do we learn to lead together? I agree 120%. I say more than 100 when I really agree. Sheila, that is incredible because that is actually one of the things that we notice is sometimes missing from the equation and from conversations about missions, right? It's about charity and those who need, instead of thinking that everyone comes to the table with an asset. And I'll give you a very specific example. Wendell Dorsainville, he's the one, the second to your right. He's the one with the cross, so pretty easy to identify in this picture. He was recruited as part of our 2016 cohort. And what I love about Wendell is that he was unapologetic and very transparent, that he wanted to be recruited and work with APA to then transpose it to the Episcopal Church. He's a bright light in the Episcopal Church in Haiti as a young person. And he wanted to understand how he could lead and be a leader within the Episcopal Church based on having experience as a teacher. And so what I love about Wendell is that he has led transformation as a third grade teacher and has taken everything that Charles asked me about, right? How do we educate our teacher leaders? And has used it to lead acolytes. And so the picture in the top right is actually him leading the entire corps of acolytes from his region. So he's in Mirebalais, which is about an hour north of Port-au-Prince. He leads workshops for them. He leads trainings and seminars and outings and field trips. And what I love is that he has taken the pedagogy of classroom practice and has made it come alive as an acolyte ministry leader. The other thing that he's done really powerfully, this is Wendell, is he has started a musical group. So all those peers in blue at the bottom there is a men's kind of singing group that now tours Haiti and has a lot of different demands and requests. And what I think is the foundation of their success is Wendell acting as a collaborative leader and acting as a servant leader. Very few people understand how much he does behind the scenes, because for him, it's about mission and it's about giving praise and honor to our Lord Jesus Christ. But what I love is that the tools and the techniques have come from his work as a teacher. So I wanted to close with just some principles and some lessons learned about how collective leadership and church leadership, I think, really are one and the same. The first is a question that we have learned to ask ourselves very openly. The first is, what are your intentions as a leader? It's a pretty simple question, but I worry sometimes that our teacher leaders, our political leaders, our church leaders fail to pause and have moments of self-reflection, have moments where they just ask themselves, what are my ultimate aims here? What is my ultimate intention? Is it to be a servant leader or a leader servant, right? What are the intentions that are behind my role and my title as leader? The second lesson learned that we've had at Anseye Pou Ayiti is the fact that so often we forget that our identity is not in a vacuum, that our identity as leaders should absolutely be part of the whole and as part of our community. But that's not possible if you haven't taken the time to understand your community and understand its local context. And so it's really important for us that our teacher leaders take the time to understand exactly the work that they're doing in exactly that location. Don't extrapolate that what happens in Port-au-Prince is what's going to be happening in Mirebalais where Wendell works, right? Don't assume that what happens in Atlanta, Georgia is exactly what Washington, D.C. needs or what Detroit, Michigan needs, right? And so we really emphasize this intentional and sometimes long journey of understanding context and your identity as it fits in with the greater whole. The other thing that I've learned from doing that identity and soul searching is that if you don't do it, it may have unintentional repercussions on the work that you do. Because if you haven't understood why you've come to the work and why your purpose has been to launch a mission or a ministry, inevitably it will have consequences. The third piece is understanding the difference between being a leader of hierarchy or a leader of influence. In Haiti, the default is hierarchy, right? It's power, it's privilege, it's wealth, it's reputation. And what we're trying to do is redefine that and shift it on its head so that our teacher leaders understand the most powerful thing you can have is influence, right? Of course, influence for good is our aim, but let's forget this idea of that the title is what's important. Or having a mic in your hand and standing on a podium is what's important. Because honestly, the work that you can do behind the scenes and influence you have is usually more long-lasting and much more effective. The fourth is exactly what I think Sheila brought up in the chat, this idea of co-creation of vision, objectives, and strategy. I caution everyone who has really exciting ideas at jumping in and just saying, this was the vision, here it is, I'm going to print it out and distribute. Here's the strategy, I've thought about it, everything's perfect. What we learned at Anseye Pou Ayiti is that it was incredibly important to go through a process of co-creation. And we did this with kids as young as 2nd and 3rd grade. We sat with them and asked them questions. We sat with parents. And in our context, so often parents are not given a voice. Many of them may not have had a chance to finish their education, but that does not mean that their input is not worthy. And I think the same thing in our churches, right? Who are the people who are voiceless? Who are the people who don't have a chance to stand and make an announcement or contribute to the sermon or lead lay ministry, but who absolutely have a voice and absolutely have input and should be part of the co-creation of the church's vision and objectives and strategy. I've mentioned the next point quite often about the intentionality of language. This doesn't come easy, right? It has to be disciplined and it has to be repeated. But this intentionality of language is really important. You and us, I and we, those have very, very different power, right? They lead to much different cultures. The other thing I should say about language, I love that the Global Episcopal Church has moved in the direction of translating a lot of texts. I love that I'm seeing Spanish so much more often. I love that I'm seeing different languages come through. It's not by coincidence that our organization is named in Haitian Creole. It's not by coincidence that a lot of what we do is in the native tongue and the native language of our people, because even that signals what you care about and that you respect people enough to approach them and to speak with them in a language that they will understand. And so I encourage all of us to really think about how power comes from language and communication, and so that we don't unintentionally shift the power dynamic just by using a language or words that carry a lot of weight. And then the next point is the gifts and talents we each bring to the table. I think I've mentioned this already, and never ever minimizing or overlooking the gifts that every single person can contribute, even when they come from what others might label poor or underserved or at risk. There's so many labels that we put on people that often just completely negate and overlook what they can bring and their contributions. And then the last piece is the fact that again and again, we are seeing quantitative and qualitative proof that when we work together and when we're co-creating real vision and real mission, the roots of that change are irrefutable and so deep. The roots of what we're starting to create at APA, I know there will come a time when we are no longer in operation as an organization, because to be honest, I don't think it's a nonprofit that should lead education equity. It should be policy. At the same time, I know there will be a time when I am not leading as CEO. But what I hope is that if we're doing things in a way that's truly collective and truly about collective action, the roots will be so deep and they will last well beyond us. So that is my presentation, and I'm so grateful again that you all have had a chance to interact. And I know there's about 5 or 6 minutes left here, so I'd love to take any questions, any feedback, and any other thoughts that really struck you in particular during this webinar.
Thank you so much, Nadine. This is just tremendous, and such a wonderful wealth of knowledge you're sharing, in addition to just inspiring, I think, all of us this evening. So again, any questions, comments, please, again, feel free to use the chat box, or if you would rather not have to sit there typing all the time, just raise your hand or indicate so in the chat box, and I can get you so that you're unmuted and can speak to Nadine. And then again, to our folks who are watching over Facebook Live, you can put your comments directly into the post, and I will relay those to Najin. Well, I have a question, at least in the meantime.
Sure.
It's just amazing the success, and I just applaud how measured, and I particularly admired that when originally looking at you for as an ECF fellow over managing growth. And I think sometimes we run into this, and sometimes we even see this with churches, especially when they're trying to negotiate situations where, say, a ministry is starting to really take off, and there's a lot of energy with that. How did you manage growth in a way that wasn't inhibiting the work that you're doing and not, I guess, sort of stymieing the energy that people have, but knowing that this would be sustainable?
Great question, Brendan. Thank you. One of the things that I realized, and again, this is the beauty, I think, of the slow and steady approach before we launched, is that one of the pitfalls of growth is that you tend to do too much too quickly. In the really traditional way, it's, you run before you walk. And I think it's especially common when you're working in missions and ministry where the need is so large that you want to work with as many students as possible, as quickly as possible. I've always had a default quality metric before quantity, because I do think, again, back to the depth of change, if you do and work with 200 teacher leaders really, really well, I'd rather that than 1,000 teacher leaders done mediocre. And so mediocrity, unfortunately, I think is killing us in terms of education. And so we really wanted excellence and quality. And so that's the first part of my answer to you, Brendan. I think we had to set up a sense of what are we in this for? And if it's about quality education, not just basic education, we have to set certain limits on how fast we grow. I think the other thing that we wanted to do is redefine scale, because we get that question so often, is because there's so many kids in Haiti in need, people say, grow faster. You see proof of impact, grow faster, grow faster. And what we've responded is that for us, scale is depth, right? Scale is understanding that even if we're not there in 5 to 10 years, the impact and the seeds of what we've planted will be so, so deep, as I said before, that will be the metric of our success. Not that we reached 100 communities, but that the 5 or the 10 that we did really well. And so everything we've invested has gone towards that, the depth of our impact and the quality of the results. And then the last thing that I'll mention, Brendan, that I hope is relevant for a lot of you on the line is no does not mean never, right? So when we start to get a lot of requests for growth and scale and momentum, et cetera, what I've had to learn to say is not yet. It's not about no, it's not about I will never do that, but just in the next 2 to 3 years, let's do this really, really well, instead of growing so fast that we spread ourselves too thin. And so all of those different things had to be conversations. I couldn't just have those conversations in my head. We needed to have it with our staff and with our community members and with churches that say, take on this school and take on that school. We've said, if we do this well today, 5 years from now, you'll be so much better off at working with us.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to. I don't mean to monopolize the session, and but please feel free to type those in, or let me know that you would like to speak with Najin. Here's another, as we wrap up, would just love to hear your thoughts in terms of your hope for what the Episcopal Church can become, in terms of the ministry that we do, in terms of the outreach that we do.
Yeah, and it's funny, that actually relates directly to the point I wanted to raise as I reread Sheila's point about congregations collaborating in ministry. I read that quickly, and now I'm realizing she was saying not just between individuals, but congregation to congregations coming together. That links to one of my aspirations and my hopes for the Episcopal Church, is that I feel sometimes we operate in silos. Great churches are doing great things, and they don't know about it, right? I'll give an example. I think there's a lot of missions and ministries happening in Haiti, and people don't know about each other. And it's alarming because that's not the best use of resources, and it's also not the best use of kind of the potential of collaborative leadership and collective action. And so one of the things that I hope we work towards as the Episcopal Church is facilitating communication between us. One, we have to value it, right? If we don't value collaboration, that's a whole other thing we need to work on. But if we say we do, and we really do, are there mechanisms, whether it's through digital ministries, as you were bringing up before, Brendan, are there social media platforms, are there different gatherings in person that we can do that specifically says who is doing what, how can we collaborate so that we're not reinventing the wheel every single time? And so I think that's one of my aspirations. The other aspirations I would have is that we take a look at our definition of mission. I love that even in my time growing up from birth through today in the Episcopal Church, I feel like the definition of mission has changed. And I think we need to be having that conversation more boldly and more loudly, because I still think people have a very outdated definition of mission in their heads, but the reality of it has changed quite a bit in the Episcopal Church. And so I hope we can more boldly and more powerfully be talking about how mission is not charity, it's not aid, but it's very much partnership. And I've seen that in action so many times, but I just don't know if there's enough venues and forums where we're talking about that enough together. And then lastly is just the fact that we need to continue to bring in the young people. I just feel so inspired by people like Wendell, who's leading Acolytes in Mio Ballet. There's so many young Episcopalians who I think are hungry to contribute to leadership in the church. And so I'm excited for what that generation can do as we continue to include them and incorporate them.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, Charles, for your comments too. I think we can all agree with that and look forward to growth, not just for growth's sake, but the growth that really makes that difference because it's rooted in the mission and it's rooted in the ministry. Well, thank you, Najeen, for taking all the time to share this with us. Thank you, everyone, for participating. This was just a joy to be part of this webinar this evening. One final request for our participants is that within about a minute or two, you will be receiving an email in your inbox with a link to a survey. Please just take a couple minutes by clicking on that link to provide your feedback. As we know that is so critical in being able to determine what we're doing and how we can do better. We will, of course, share this feedback with Najeen. And I also utilize this with my team to look at what content we'll plan in future. That's part of why we're doing the Q&A chat. To some folks were like, oh, do something during the day, but not necessarily so time commitment. So please add your comments, add your feedback. We look at everything. Again, thank you all for attending. Thank you, Najeen. God bless and Godspeed in your ministry, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks so much, everyone.